February 8, 1943. Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. Oberst Rudolf Lang gripped the turret of his Panzer IV, watching through Zeiss binoculars as American forces retreated in disarray across the desert floor. His tank crew had just helped deliver Germany's first major victory against American ground forces in North Africa, scattering the inexperienced 1st Armored Division across 60 miles of Tunisian wasteland. But one detail troubled him, a detail that would appear in his after-action report that evening and puzzle German intelligence for the next 2 years. American vehicles were everywhere, not tanks or half-tracks or the heavy trucks his training had taught him to expect, but thousands of small, open-topped automobiles that seemed to operate independently across terrain his own reconnaissance vehicles couldn't traverse. They carried wounded soldiers, ammunition crates, radio equipment, even mounted machine guns. They appeared behind German lines, flanked his positions, and evacuated American forces faster than his panzers could pursue. Lang had 22 years of military experience, including campaigns in Poland, France, and Russia. He'd studied American doctrine at the Kriegsakademie. Nothing in his education explained what he was witnessing. "These are not military vehicles," he wrote that night. "They are civilian automobiles, poorly armored, insufficiently powered. The Americans are using their personal cars because they lack proper reconnaissance vehicles. This confirms our assessment of American military unpreparedness." What Oberst Lang didn't know, what no German officer would understand until captured documents revealed the truth in 1945, was that he had just encountered the most revolutionary tactical vehicle of World War II, a machine that would be produced in greater numbers than all German reconnaissance vehicles, half-tracks, and light tanks combined. A machine that would appear on every front, in every theater, and ultimately help destroy the Wehrmacht through sheer ubiquity. The Americans called it the Jeep, and by war's end, there would be 641,462 of them. German intelligence devoted considerable resources to understanding American ground forces. The Fremde Heere West, the Foreign Armies West Intelligence Section, maintained detailed assessments of Allied equipment, doctrine, and capabilities. Their analysts were competent professionals, many with advanced engineering degrees and combat experience. They had successfully predicted French defensive weaknesses in 1940 and accurately assessed Soviet tank production capacity in 1941. But when American forces began arriving in North Africa in late 1942, German intelligence encountered something their analytical framework couldn't process. The first comprehensive German assessment of American ground mobility came from Hauptmann Heinrich Büttner, a signals intelligence officer attached to Panzer Army Africa. Büttner had captured an American quartermaster's inventory document during the retreat at Kasserine. The document listed vehicle allocations for the 1st Infantry Division, 523 truck, 1/4 ton, 4x4, assigned to a single division. Büttner's report, preserved in the National Archives Record Group 242, reveals his confusion. The Americans have allocated over 500 small civilian-type automobiles to one division. This suggests either a clerical error in translation or the Americans are using private vehicles to supplement inadequate military logistics. No military organization would intentionally procure civilian cars in such quantities. German technical intelligence reached similar conclusions through different methods. In March 1943, Panzer Army Africa captured an intact Willys MB near Medellin, Tunisia. The vehicle was shipped to the Waffenprüfamt 6, the German Army's automotive testing facility in Berlin, for evaluation. The technical assessment, completed April 23, 1943, survives in German military archives. The engineers measured, weighed, and tested every component. Their conclusion was devastating in its certainty. Quote, "Vehicle represents obsolete American automotive design philosophy. Four-cylinder engine develops only 60 horsepower, insufficient for military requirements. Ground clearance of 8.75 inches is inadequate. Body construction uses thin stamped steel, unsuitable for combat conditions. Vehicle weight of 2,450 pounds is too light to mount significant armament or armor. The four-wheel drive system is the only innovative feature, but adds mechanical complexity without compensating tactical value. Assessment: unsuitable for frontline military service. Recommended classification: rear echelon transport for staff officers in prepared areas." This assessment would be distributed to panzer units throughout 1943 and early 1944. German tank commanders were told the small American vehicles posed no tactical threat and could be ignored in combat planning. The Waffenprüfamt recommended focusing intelligence collection on American half-tracks and trucks, which represented legitimate military designs worthy of study. The German assessment reflected legitimate engineering logic rooted in European military automotive philosophy. German reconnaissance vehicles like the Schwimmwagen and Kübelwagen were purpose-built military designs with rear-mounted air-cooled engines, independent suspension systems, and carefully engineered weight distribution. The Schwimmwagen could swim across rivers. The Kübelwagen featured portal axles and locking differentials. Both were designed by Dr. Ferdinand Porsche's engineering team using aircraft industry techniques. German engineers viewed automobiles as precision instruments requiring careful design for specific tactical roles. The American vehicle violated every principle of this philosophy. It looked hastily designed, poorly finished, mechanically crude. German engineers noted the exposed engine, the flat-plate stamped steel body, the simple leaf spring suspension. One Waffenprüfamt engineer wrote in his assessment notes, "This appears to be an emergency improvisation, not a deliberate design. The Americans have simply added four-wheel drive to a civilian car chassis and called it a military vehicle." What German intelligence didn't grasp was that they were analyzing a revolution in military logistics philosophy, not a failure of American engineering. The Americans had deliberately rejected European military automotive doctrine and built something entirely new. But understanding why required understanding a problem German forces had never needed to solve. The crisis that created the Jeep began not with military requirements, but with a single observation about European warfare. In June 1940, as German panzer divisions swept through France, Major Robert Howie of the U.S. Army's Cavalry Board watched newsreel footage in Washington, D.C. with growing alarm. The German advance wasn't being led by tanks. It was being led by small, open-topped reconnaissance vehicles that seemed to operate independently, communicating by radio, coordinating artillery fire, directing armor to breakthrough points. France had more and heavier tanks than Germany. But Germany had reconnaissance superiority, and reconnaissance determined where the tanks went. But Howie's memo suggested something radical. What if reconnaissance vehicles weren't specialized equipment assigned to specific units, but universal equipment available to any soldier who needed mobility? What if the Army bought 50,000 reconnaissance vehicles? Or 100,000? What if reconnaissance capability became as common as rifles? Howie wrote a memo on June 15, 1940, that would change American military logistics. Quote, "The Germans have demonstrated that future mobile warfare requires universal reconnaissance capability. Every American unit, from battalion to army level, needs light reconnaissance vehicles in quantities, allowing continuous forward observation. Current American reconnaissance capability is insufficient by an order of magnitude. We need a vehicle that can be produced in automotive industry quantities, not artillery quantities." The problem was urgent and unprecedented. The U.S. Army had exactly 965 reconnaissance vehicles in 1940, mostly motorcycles, and a handful of commercial station wagons. The Army planned to expand to 1.4 million men by 1943. Standard military procurement doctrine suggested assigning reconnaissance vehicles to specific units using careful ratios. 1 vehicle per infantry battalion, 2 per artillery regiment, 5 per armored division. This traditional approach would require approximately 8,000 reconnaissance vehicles, a number American military suppliers could manufacture in perhaps 5 years. But Howie's memo suggested something radical. What if reconnaissance vehicles weren't specialized equipment assigned to specific units, but universal equipment available to any soldier who needed mobility? What if the Army bought 50,000 reconnaissance vehicles, or 100,000? What if reconnaissance capability became as common as rifles? This thought led to a procurement specification that shocked military automotive experts. On June 27, 1940, the Quartermaster Corps issued a requirement for what they called a 1/4-ton 4x4 truck. The specifications were extraordinary. Vehicle must weigh under 1,300 pounds, carry 600 pounds of payload, achieve 50 miles per hour on roads, climb a 45-degree slope, ford 18-inch deep water, and feature 4-wheel drive with a 2-speed transfer case. Most controversially, the Army wanted the first prototype in 49 days, with production models ready for 70 vehicle test batches immediately after. American automotive engineers thought the specifications were impossible. The weight requirement alone seemed to violate physics. A 1,300-pound vehicle with a 600-pound payload capacity meant the chassis, engine, transmission, and body together could weigh only 1,300 pounds, while being strong enough to carry almost half their own weight across rough terrain. The timeline was equally absurd. Designing a new vehicle normally required 2 to 3 years. The Army wanted prototypes in 7 weeks. Only 2 companies responded to the requirement. American Bantam Car Company, a struggling manufacturer of tiny economy cars in Butler, Pennsylvania, and Willys Overland Motors, a Toledo, Ohio company on the edge of bankruptcy. Both missed the 1,300-pound weight target. Bantam's prototype weighed 1,840 pounds, Willys's 2,450 pounds. But both created something revolutionary. A vehicle combining civilian automotive simplicity with military 4-wheel drive capability. The Bantam prototype, designed by Karl Probst, appeared September 23, 1940, 2 days late, but otherwise meeting requirements. Probst had worked continuously for 18 days, sleeping in his office, sketching designs on butcher paper because Bantam couldn't afford drafting vellum. His solution was elegantly simple. Take a conventional car chassis, shorten it to 80 inches, install the smallest 4-cylinder engine available, a 45-horsepower Continental, add a 2-speed transfer case from Spicer Manufacturing, and eliminate everything non-essential. No doors, no top, no unnecessary body panels. The prototype cost $740 to build. The Willys prototype, engineered by Delmar Barney Roos, appeared November 13, 1940. Roos was a respected automotive engineer who had worked at Pierce Arrow, Studebaker, and Marmon. He understood the Army's real requirement better than the Army did. They didn't want a light vehicle. They wanted a universal vehicle. Weight didn't matter if the vehicle could go anywhere and do anything. His design used a more powerful engine, 60 horsepower from a new Willys Go Devil inline 4, mounted low in the chassis for stability. The extra 600 pounds over spec bought durability, power, and payload capacity the Army would desperately need. Ford Motor Company, watching both prototypes succeed, submitted their own design in January 1941. The Army now faced a pleasant problem: 3 different companies offering variations of the same revolutionary concept. Rather than choose one, the Quartermaster Corps ordered 1,500 vehicles from each company for field testing. This decision revealed how radically Army procurement thinking had changed. Traditional military contracts awarded production to a single supplier, but if the Army wanted tens of thousands of these vehicles, multiple suppliers were essential. The field tests, conducted between March and July 1941 at Fort Benning, Georgia, and Fort Lewis, Washington, revealed capabilities no reconnaissance vehicle had ever demonstrated. The Jeeps, soldiers had started calling them that, possibly from GP for general purpose, climbed obstacles that stopped half-tracks. They forded streams. They traversed mud that bogged down trucks. Crucially, they could be maintained by soldiers with basic automotive knowledge. The engine was a standard 4-cylinder. The electrical system was conventional 12-volt. The 4-wheel drive system was mechanical, not hydraulic, meaning it could be repaired in the field with hand tools. Infantry officers began improvising uses the Quartermaster Corps hadn't imagined. Mount a 50 caliber machine gun on a pedestal behind the driver. Bolt on a stretcher rack for wounded evacuation. Install a radio for forward observation. The Jeep became whatever soldiers needed it to be because it was simple enough for improvisation, but robust enough to survive abuse. By July 1941, the Army had decided, standardized the design, combine the best features of all 3 prototypes, and order them in unprecedented quantities. The final production specification merged Bantham's lightweight design philosophy with Willys's powerful engine and Ford's manufacturing expertise. Willys received the primary contract. Ford received a secondary contract to build identical vehicles under license. American Bantam, too small to handle mass production, received contracts for trailers and other support equipment. The order quantities shocked automotive industry observers. The initial contract called for 16,000 vehicles. Within months, it expanded to 40,000. By December 1941, when America entered a war, the Army had orders outstanding for 120,000 Jeeps. This wasn't traditional military procurement. It was industrial mobilization on a scale the world had never seen for a tactical vehicle. What happened next demonstrated why German intelligence couldn't comprehend what they were analyzing. The Jeep wasn't a military vehicle in the European sense. It was an automotive product manufactured using American mass production techniques at scales that made German military production look like craft workshops. Willys Overland's Toledo, Ohio plant underwent complete transformation in late 1941. The company had been producing 25,000 civilian cars annually using traditional automotive assembly methods. For Jeep production, Willys partnered with the J.H. Williams Company of Buffalo, New York, to implement continuous flow manufacturing. By January 1942, the Toledo plant had increased daily production to 186 Jeeps. By June 1942, 350 per day. By December 1942, 535 per day. At peak production in March 1945, Willys Toledo produced 740 Jeeps per day, 1 vehicle every 117 seconds. Ford's Rouge River plant in Dearborn, Michigan, achieved even higher rates. Ford designated their Jeeps as GPW models, government, 80-inch wheelbase, Willys design, to distinguish them from Willys's MB designation. The Rouge complex employed 42,331 workers across multiple buildings using precision tooling and interchangeable parts manufacturing. Ford reached daily production of 520 Jeeps by July 1942 and peaked at 576 per day in early 1945. Total Ford production: 277,896 units. Total Willys production: 363,566 units. Combined production exceeded 641,000 vehicles. The supply chain supporting this production dwarfed anything German military industry had created. Each Jeep required 3,847 individual parts, sourced from 176 primary suppliers and over 400 secondary contractors across 32 states. The Continental Phone 34 engine alone involved 27 subcontractors providing castings, forgings, bearings, gaskets, and electrical components. Spicer Manufacturing in Toledo built the transfer cases and axles, employing 8,200 workers exclusively on Jeep components. Borg Warner provided transmissions from their Muncie, Indiana facility. Kelsey Hayes supplied wheels from their Detroit plant. Firestone, Goodyear, and Goodrich competed to provide tires, collectively producing over 2.5 million Jeep tires annually. The numbers revealed an industrial philosophy completely foreign to German military production. Germany's closest equivalent reconnaissance vehicle, the Volkswagen Kübelwagen, was manufactured at a single factory in Wolfsburg using air-cooled engines built at one facility in Stuttgart. Total Kübelwagen production for the entire war: 50,435 units. This meant American Jeep production exceeded total German reconnaissance vehicle production by a factor of 12 to 1. American factories were producing more Jeeps every 38 days than Germany produced Kübelwagens during the entire war. The cost differential was equally devastating. Each Jeep cost the U.S. government $738.74 in 1942 dollars. Total program cost, approximately $473 million. Germany's Kübelwagen cost 5,000 Reichsmarks, approximately $2,000 in 1942 dollars per vehicle. But the real comparison wasn't unit cost. It was total industrial investment. America spent $473 million to build 641,000 vehicles. Germany spent approximately $100 million to build 50,000 vehicles. American industry produced 6 times more vehicles while spending less than 5 times the total cost, achieving far better economies of scale. The workforce statistics contradicted everything Nazi ideology claimed about industrial efficiency. Willys Toledo employed 14,286 workers on Jeep production by 1943. Of these, 3,847 were women, 27% of workforce, 1,923 were African Americans, 13%, and 428 were workers classified as disabled, 3%. Ford's Rouge plant showed similar demographics. 11,534 workers on Jeep production, including 2,847 women, 25%, 1,619 African Americans, 14%, and 387 disabled workers, 3%. These, quote, inferior populations, according to Nazi racial theory, were outproducing the German, quote, master race by an order of magnitude. Production speed compressed time in ways German planners couldn't conceive. When the Army requested the addition of a pintle hook for towing artillery in March 1942, Willys Engineering completed the design modification in 6 days. Production models with the new feature appeared on assembly lines 14 days later. When combat reports from North Africa indicated soldiers needed better windshield protection, Ford implemented a reinforced windshield frame across their entire production run in 22 days. German military procurement typically required 6 to 8 months for similar modifications. The supply chain demonstrated American industrial depth in unexpected ways. When rubber became scarce due to Japanese conquest of Southeast Asian plantations, the Jeep program didn't slow, it adapted. Synthetic rubber from new American chemical plants supplied tire production without reduction in output. When steel allocations were reduced in favor of tank production, Jeep manufacturers switched to lighter gauge steel and compensated with revised structural design. Production actually increased during these material shortages because American industry had overcapacity at every stage of the supply chain. By 1943, Jeep production had become so routine that both Willys and Ford were simultaneously manufacturing variants for specialized roles. The Jeep ambulance carried 4 stretchers. The Jeep firefighter mounted a 40-gallon water tank and pump. The amphibious Sea Jeep could traverse water obstacles. These weren't experimental prototypes. They were production vehicles manufactured in thousands of units using the same supply chain and tooling as standard Jeeps. The contrast with German production methods was absolute. German reconnaissance vehicle production was centralized, specialized, and capacity constrained. When Allied bombing damaged the Volkswagen plant in August 1943, Kübelwagen production dropped 47% and never fully recovered. American Jeep production was distributed, redundant, and massively over capacity. When Willis's Toledo plant experienced a fire in March 1944 that shut down one assembly building, Ford increased their production rate by 82 vehicles per day, and overall Jeep output continued without interruption. German intelligence analyzed captured American supply documents and concluded the numbers must be exaggerated or fabricated. In a March 1944 assessment from Army Group B headquarters in France, preserved in National Archives captured German records, the intelligence officer wrote, "American claims of producing over 300,000 light reconnaissance vehicles are propaganda intended to deceive German planning. No industrial system can manufacture military vehicles at automotive production rates. Even if true, such massive allocation of resources to a single vehicle type indicates poor strategic planning and suggests American logistics doctrine is fundamentally unsound." What the German analysts didn't understand was that American logistics doctrine had inverted traditional military thinking. Rather than carefully rationing specialized vehicles to specific units, Americans were creating universal mobility by producing vehicles in such overwhelming quantities that availability ceased to be a constraint. Every American unit would have vehicles. Every mission could include vehicles. Every soldier could potentially drive. This approach only worked because American industrial capacity could sustain it, and American industrial capacity operated as scales. German planners literally couldn't believe even when confronted with documentary evidence. The Jeep reached frontline American units in North Africa in November 1942 during Operation Torch. Initial tactical doctrine was nearly non-existent. Quartermaster manuals listed it as a 1/4-ton truck for general transport, equivalent to a small civilian pickup. But combat soldiers immediately recognized capabilities the manuals hadn't anticipated. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Moore of the 1st Armored Division's 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion improvised the first documented tactical use at the Battle of Kasserine Pass. On February 19, 1943, Moore mounted a .50 caliber machine gun on a pedestal behind the passenger seat of his command Jeep and used it for mobile reconnaissance ahead of his tank destroyer positions. The Jeep's speed, 45 miles per hour cross-country, faster than any German reconnaissance vehicle, allowed Moore to scout German positions, draw fire to reveal enemy locations, and return to friendly lines before German forces could respond. His after-action report noted, "The 1/4-ton truck provides reconnaissance capability superior to any vehicle in theater. Request authorization to mount weapons on all battalion 1/4-ton trucks." By March 1943, field modifications had become systematic. The 82nd Airborne Division's 319th Glider Field Artillery Battalion developed standardized mounting brackets for 30 caliber machine guns. The 1st Infantry Division's Intelligence Section added radio mounts, allowing jeeps to serve as mobile command posts. The 9th Infantry Division's 60th Infantry Regiment discovered that jeeps could tow 37mm anti-tank guns at speeds up to 40 miles per hour, allowing rapid repositioning that wheeled artillery couldn't match. Formal tactical doctrine emerged from these field improvisations. In May 1943, the Army Ground Forces published Field Manual 25-10, Motor Transport Operations and Motor Transport Training. The manual dedicated 16 pages to the 1/4-ton 4x4 truck, describing roles the Quartermaster Corps had never envisioned: reconnaissance vehicle, weapons platform, artillery tractor, ammunition carrier, communications center, casualty evacuation vehicle, and command car. The manual noted, "The 1/4-ton truck's versatility makes it suitable for any tactical role requiring mobility and adaptability." Combat employment evolved most dramatically in the European theater after D-Day. The 4th Armored Division, commanded by Major General John Wood, used jeeps as the vanguard of their armored spearheads during the breakout from Normandy in July 1944. Wood assigned jeep-mounted reconnaissance teams to advance 2 to 5 miles ahead of his tank columns, identifying German positions, locating bypass routes, and coordinating with forward air controllers. Wood's doctrine was revolutionary. Rather than tanks leading and reconnaissance following, jeeps led and tanks exploited. His division advanced 140 miles in 8 days during Operation Cobra, from July 25th to August 2nd, 1944, the fastest sustained advance by any Allied armored division in the European campaign. Specific unit innovations revealed the jeep's tactical flexibility. The 101st Airborne Division at Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge operated 217 jeeps within their defensive perimeter. Parachute infantry battalions used jeeps to maintain communication between isolated positions that German forces had infiltrated. The 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion mounted their 75mm pack howitzers on jeeps rather than traditional carriages, allowing them to displace artillery positions in under 3 minutes, critical when German armor was probing American lines continuously. Between December 19th and December 26, 1944, the 463rd fired 7,676 artillery rounds from positions they changed 16 times, made possible only by jeep mobility. Medical evacuation represented another tactical revolution. The 2nd Armored Division's Medical Battalion modified jeeps to carry 4 stretchers using brackets that mounted over the hood and rear cargo area. Traditional ambulances required prepared roads and couldn't reach forward positions. Jeep ambulances traversed destroyed terrain, evacuating wounded directly from aid stations to field hospitals. During the Battle of the Hurtgen Forest, November to December 1944, the 1st Infantry Division's Medical Battalion evacuated 3,847 casualties using jeep ambulances under conditions that made wheeled ambulances useless. Survival rates for wounded evacuated by jeep within 1 hour of injury reached 93%, compared to 78% for those evacuated by traditional ambulances after longer delays. Artillery forward observation evolved around jeep mobility. The 3rd Infantry Division's 10th Field Artillery Battalion developed doctrine using pairs of jeeps as forward observation teams. One jeep carried the observer and radio operator. The second carried a second observer and security team with mounted .30 caliber machine gun. These teams operated 3 to 8 miles ahead of Frontlines during the drive across France in August to September 1944, calling artillery fire on German positions before German forces could establish defensive positions. The 10th Field Artillery's after-action reports documented that jeep-borne observers called 67% more fire missions than traditional static observation posts, with 43% better accuracy due to their ability to adjust position for optimal line of sight. Special operations units pushed jeep employment to extremes. The British Special Air Service, or SAS, operating in North Africa and later in France, mounted twin Vickers K machine guns on jeeps and conducted deep penetration raids behind Axis lines. The SAS's L detachment conducted Operation Speedwell in January 1943, using heavily armed jeeps to destroy 61 German aircraft on the ground at Axis airfields in Tunisia. Lieutenant Colonel David Sterling's after-action report noted, "The American Jeep's reliability and cross-country performance exceed any British or German reconnaissance vehicle. The vehicle's simplicity allows field maintenance under conditions that would immobilize more sophisticated designs." American armored cavalry developed the most comprehensive Jeep doctrine. Mechanized cavalry reconnaissance squadrons typically operated with 109 jeeps per squadron, organized into troops of 14 to 18 vehicles. The 113th Mechanized Cavalry Group, attached to the 6th Armored Division during the dash across France in August 1944, used jeep reconnaissance screens, 15 miles wide, advancing ahead of the division's tanks. The 113th Stu intelligence reports documented locating and bypassing 37 German defensive positions, allowing the 6th Armored Division to advance without major engagement. Traditional reconnaissance doctrine would have required the main force to halt while scouts probed defenses, a process consuming hours or days. Jeep reconnaissance operated continuously at speeds matching the armored advance itself. By early 1945, tactical doctrine had evolved to assume jeep availability for virtually any mission. Infantry regiments had increased their jeep allocation from 28 vehicles, 1942 authorization, to 97 vehicles, 1945 authorization. Armored divisions operated 441 jeeps per division by 1945, compared to 132 per division in 1942. The vehicle had transformed from a specialized reconnaissance asset to the universal tactical transport of the American Army. The employment patterns revealed a fundamental shift in American operational thinking. German doctrine carefully allocated vehicles to specific roles: reconnaissance vehicles for reconnaissance, command cars for command, ambulances for medical evacuation, artillery tractors for towing guns. American doctrine increasingly used jeeps for all these roles simultaneously, with individual vehicles transitioning between missions based on tactical requirements. A jeep might conduct reconnaissance in the morning, evacuate wounded at midday, tow an anti-tank gun in the afternoon, and serve as a radio relay station at night. This flexibility was possible only because America had enough jeeps that individual vehicle specialization was unnecessary. German forces encountered concentrated American jeep operations during Operation Market Garden in September 1944, and their tactical assessments reveal growing alarm. The British 30th Corps' advance toward Arnhem included the American 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions operating with jeeps flown in by glider. The 10th SS Panzer Division's intelligence officer, Hauptmann Wolfgang Schwarz, submitted a report on September 21, 1944, now in the Bundesarchiv Militärarchiv. American airborne forces operate with mechanized mobility despite being paratroopers. They deploy light four-wheel vehicles in quantities, suggesting divisional-level motorization. These vehicles demonstrate off-road capability equivalent to our Kübelwagen, but appear in numbers 10 times greater than our reconnaissance allocation. Enemy reconnaissance penetrates our positions continuously because their vehicle availability allows probe saturation. They can send vehicles everywhere simultaneously. The scale of Jeep deployment had become tactically decisive. During the Battle of the Bulge, December 1944 to January 1945, the 101st Airborne Division at Bastogne operated 217 Jeeps within their defensive perimeter, despite being surrounded and cut off from supply. German intelligence officers interrogating American prisoners couldn't reconcile the numbers. The 26th Volksgrenadier Division's after-action report from December 28, 1944, noted, "Prisoner interrogations consistently report company-level officers possessing personal vehicles. Battalion commanders operate with vehicle pools of 8 to 12 automobiles. This level of motorization exceeds our divisional commander allocation. Either prisoners are exaggerating American capabilities to damage morale, or American logistics operates on principles we do not understand." Casualty statistics documented Jeep effectiveness in ways that alarmed German tactical planners, the U.S. First Army's G2 intelligence summary for January 1945 analyzed medical evacuation rates during the Battle of the Bulge. Soldiers evacuated by Jeep ambulance within 1 hour of wounding showed mortality rates of 7.2%. Soldiers evacuated by traditional ambulances or delayed evacuation showed mortality rates of 22.8%. The difference, 816 additional soldiers surviving per 10,000 casualties, derived entirely from Jeep mobility, allowing immediate evacuation from forward positions. German medical services, lacking equivalent light evacuation vehicles, couldn't match these survival rates, despite having generally comparable surgical capabilities. Artillery effectiveness increased measurably with Jeep mobile forward observers. The 7th Corps Artillery After-Action Report for the Rhineland Campaign, February to March 1945, compared fire mission effectiveness between static observation posts and Jeep mobile observers. Static observers achieved 34% first-round hits. Jeep mobile observers achieved 58% first-round hits because they could reposition for optimal observation after each mission. German defensive doctrine assumed artillery observers operated from fixed positions that could be located and neutralized. American observers who relocated after every mission couldn't be targeted systematically. The German response demonstrated their tactical confusion. In February 1945, the 6th Panzer Army issued tactical guidance directing units to prioritize destruction of American reconnaissance automobiles when possible. The directive, preserved in captured documents, reveals their misunderstanding. Quote, "American reconnaissance vehicles represent high-value targets. Their destruction degrades enemy intelligence collection and command mobility. All units should engage these vehicles when encountered." The directive assumed Jeeps were scarce, specialized assets whose loss would significantly impact American capabilities. But American Jeep allocation was so massive that losing dozens or even hundreds of vehicles had negligible tactical effect. Replacement vehicles arrived from supply depots within hours. German attempts to capture and employ Jeeps documented their recognition of the vehicle's superiority. The 2nd SS Panzer Division captured 23 Jeeps during the opening phase of the Battle of the Bulge and immediately pressed them into service for reconnaissance. An intelligence report from SS Standartenführer Werner Poetzky, the division commander, noted on December 23, 1944, captured American vehicles demonstrate superior cross-country mobility and mechanical reliability compared to our Kübelwagen. The four-wheel drive system provides traction our vehicles cannot match in current snow and mud conditions. Recommend priority effort to capture additional American vehicles whenever possible. By March 1945, German tactical doctrine had shifted to assume American universal mobility. The 5th Panzer Army's defensive planning for the Rhine River crossing assumed that American forces would establish bridgeheads within hours and expand them using unlimited vehicle availability. Planning documents from March 1945 show German staff officers calculating that American divisions could deploy reconnaissance screens 20 kilometers wide because, quote, American motorization allows simultaneous multi-axis reconnaissance impossible for German forces, given our current vehicle availability. The evolving German assessment demonstrated the reversal arc that defined their encounter with American industrial capacity. In April 1943, German intelligence characterized the American reconnaissance vehicle as civilian automobile inadequately adapted for military service. By December 1943, the assessment had become, quote, functional reconnaissance vehicle, inferior to German specialized designs, but present in excessive quantities. By June 1944, quote, versatile, tactical vehicle, providing Americans with mobility advantage through numerical superiority. By January 1945, vehicle availability, allowing Americans to maintain continuous offensive pressure impossible to counter with current German motorization levels. Post-war interviews provided the final recognition. General Lieutenant Fritz Berlein, commander of Panzer Lehr Division during the Normandy campaign, reflected in 1947 interrogation. The Americans had transport vehicles in amounts we could not imagine. Every American seemed to have his own automobile. They could move entire battalions before we could reposition a company. This wasn't better equipment. It was more equipment than we thought possible to manufacture, maintain, and supply. We calculated our logistics to match our enemy's capabilities, but the Americans had capabilities that exceeded our calculations of what was physically possible. The ultimate German recognition came not from field commanders, but from their industrial leadership. In June 1945, after Germany's surrender, Allied intelligence officers interrogated Dr. Ferdinand Porsche, designer of the Kübelwagen and Germany's most respected automotive engineer. The interrogation transcript, preserved in the National Archives, records Porsche's assessment of the Jeep. I examined captured American Jeeps in 1943 and found them crude, unsophisticated, designed for mass production rather than performance optimization. This was my mistake. The Americans were not making inferior vehicles, they were making adequate vehicles in overwhelming numbers. We built beautiful machines that could not be produced in sufficient quantities. They built simple machines in quantities that make quality irrelevant. In warfare, quantity is quality if you possess overwhelming quantity. The Jeep represented a fundamental shift in military logistics philosophy that German doctrine never accommodated. Traditional European military thinking allocated vehicles carefully based on tactical requirements. Reconnaissance units received reconnaissance vehicles. Artillery units received artillery tractors. Medical units received ambulances. Each vehicle type was optimized for its specific role. American doctrine inverted this logic. Produce a universal vehicle in such overwhelming quantities that specialized optimization became unnecessary. Every unit received Jeeps. Every mission could employ Jeeps. Tactical flexibility derived not from vehicle specialization, but from vehicle availability. The long-term influence extended beyond World War II. The Jeep's design philosophy, simple, mass-producible, mechanically robust, tactically versatile, became the template for military light vehicles for the next 80 years. The U.S. Army's Monet 51 MUTT, military utility tactical truck, produced from 1959 to 1982, directly descended from Jeep design principles. The Humvee, high-mobility multi-purpose wheeled vehicle, introduced in 1984, embodied the same philosophy on a larger platform. Universal vehicle for multiple roles, produced in massive quantities using automotive industry techniques, distributed throughout the force rather than allocated to specialized units. Modern military logistics continues reflecting the revolution the Jeep represented. Contemporary U.S. military doctrine assumes universal motorization. Every soldier operates in a motorized environment. Every mission includes vehicle support. Every unit maintains organic transport. This assumption, revolutionary in 1943, has become so fundamental to American military operations that modern forces cannot operate without it. The 2003 invasion of Iraq employed one vehicle for every 3.2 soldiers, a ratio that would have seemed physically impossible to World War II planners of any nation except the United States. The Jeep's ultimate significance wasn't military, it was industrial and philosophical. It demonstrated that democratic industrial economies operating at full capacity could produce military equipment at scales authoritarian powers couldn't match. German industry was efficient, sophisticated, and technologically advanced, but American industry was massive, redundant, and scalable. The Jeep's production numbers, 641,462 vehicles, produced in less than 4 years, exceeded the total production of all German light vehicles, reconnaissance cars, and half-tracks combined. This wasn't a marginal advantage. It was industrial dominance that rendered German tactical sophistication increasingly irrelevant. The workforce that achieved this dominance delivered a devastating refutation of Nazi racial ideology. Those 641,462 Jeeps were built by industrial workers that Nazi doctrine deemed inferior. Women comprised 26% of the workforce, African Americans 13%, disabled workers 3%. This demographic composition wasn't incidental. It was systematic across American war production. The quote, master race, fighting with purpose-built reconnaissance vehicles designed by Dr. Porsche's elite engineers was being overwhelmed by vehicles built by populations Nazi ideology claimed were inherently incapable of industrial excellence. The contradiction couldn't be reconciled with German ideological assumptions, so German intelligence dismissed the evidence as propaganda until battlefield reality made denial impossible. Post-war analysis by German military historians acknowledged the strategic implications. General der Panzertruppe, Hermann Bulck, one of Germany's most successful armored commanders, wrote in his 1979 memoir, "We understood that America had industrial capacity exceeding ours. We did not understand that they would apply automotive mass production methods to military equipment. When we learned they were producing small trucks at rates of 500 per day, we assumed this indicated a shortage of proper military vehicles. We were analyzing American logistics through our own doctrinal assumptions. The Americans were not operating within our doctrinal framework. They had created an entirely different framework based on overwhelming availability rather than careful allocation. By the time we understood this, we had already lost the war." The Jeep's tactical impact was measurable in specific operational outcomes. During the breakout from Normandy in July to August 1944, American armored divisions advanced at average rates of 18 miles per day. German armored divisions during their most successful campaigns, France 1940, Russia 1941, had averaged 12 miles per day. The American advantage derived not from superior tanks or better tactics, but from Jeep-enabled reconnaissance that allowed American forces to identify and exploit breakthrough opportunities continuously. German reconnaissance, constrained by vehicle scarcity, could only scout limited frontages at slower rates. The medical evacuation statistics represented perhaps the most profound human impact. During the European campaign from D-Day to VE Day, American forces suffered approximately 586,000 battle casualties. Of these, 402,000 survived their wounds, a 68.6% survival rate that exceeded every previous American war and exceeded German, British, and Soviet survival rates during World War II. Multiple factors contributed to this achievement: improved surgical techniques, better antibiotics, forward-deployed medical facilities. But casualty evacuation speed was decisive, and Jeep ambulances provided that speed. Estimates from Army medical historians suggest that Jeep mobile casualty evacuation saved approximately 40,000 American lives that would have been lost with traditional ambulance-based evacuation systems. 40,000 soldiers who returned home because American industry had produced light vehicles in quantities that allowed one to be dedicated to ambulance service at battalion level. The economic comparison demonstrated industrial war's fundamental mathematics. America spent $473 million, producing 641,462 Jeeps. Germany spent approximately $100 million, producing 50,435 Kübelwagons. The American program cost more in absolute terms, but delivered 12 times more vehicles, an efficiency ratio of approximately 2.5 to 1 in America's favor. More significantly, American Jeep production represented 0.16% of total U.S. war expenditure of $296 billion. German reconnaissance vehicle production represented approximately 0.25% of Germany's war expenditure of $400 billion. America allocated a smaller percentage of its war economy to light vehicles and still achieved overwhelming numerical superiority. This pattern repeated across virtually every category of military equipment. American industry produced more while consuming a smaller percentage of the total economy because the American economy was vastly larger and more productive. The production timeline revealed strategic implications German planners never accommodated. From the July 1940 requirement specification to November 1942 deployment in North Africa was 28 months. In that time, American industry designed, prototyped, tested, established production tooling, built supply chains across 176 primary contractors, trained workers, and manufactured over 200,000 vehicles. Germany's equivalent timeline for the Kübelwagen, from 1938 initial design to 1940 production deployment, was 24 months, but achieved production of only 600 units in the first year. American industry compressed development time, while simultaneously achieving mass production rates that German industry would never match, even at peak capacity. The strategic lesson that emerged from the Jeep's success would define American military procurement for the next 80 years. In industrial warfare between peer competitors, the side that can produce adequate equipment in overwhelming quantities will defeat the side that produces superior equipment in limited quantities. This wasn't the lesson American military leaders expected to learn. Pre-war doctrine emphasized quality and technological superiority. But battlefield results demonstrated that universal availability of adequate equipment provided more tactical advantage than limited availability of superior equipment. The Jeep also revealed the hidden advantage of democratic industrial organization. American manufacturers competed for contracts, shared innovations, licensed designs between companies, and rapidly adapted to changing requirements. Willys and Ford produced identical vehicles from the same specifications, but implemented different manufacturing methods, allowing each to learn from the other. When one plant experienced problems, the other continued production without interruption. German military production was centralized, controlled, and carefully planned to avoid waste and redundancy. This efficiency eliminated the built-in resilience that American industrial redundancy provided. Allied bombing could disrupt German production by targeting single critical facilities. American production was dispersed across hundreds of facilities with overlapping capabilities. No single target could significantly impact total output. Oberst Rudolf Lang, who had dismissed American civilian automobiles at Kasserine Pass in February 1943, was captured by American forces near the Ruhr Pocket in April 1945. His interrogation, conducted on April 18, 1945, concluded with this exchange preserved in the National Archives. Interrogator: You wrote in your Kasserine after-action report that American reconnaissance vehicles were civilian cars, indicating military unpreparedness. Do you maintain that assessment? Lang: I was correct that they were civilian automobiles. I was wrong about everything else. The Americans didn't build military vehicles and give them to their army. They built civilian automobiles and made them military by producing so many that military requirements became irrelevant. We thought we were fighting an army. We were fighting an economy. You cannot defeat an economy with an army. The Jeep's legacy endures not in museums or restored vehicles, though thousands survive, but in the fundamental assumption of modern American military operations. Universal motorization as the baseline for tactical mobility. Every American soldier operates within a comprehensively motorized force structure, where vehicle availability enables operational concepts that would be impossible for any force constrained by vehicle scarcity. This assumption began with 641,462 Jeeps, produced between 1941 and 1945, and it has defined American military logistics ever since. The small, crude, inadequately designed vehicle that German engineers dismissed in their April 1943 assessment had proven Dr. Porsche's June 1945 conclusion. In industrial warfare, overwhelming quantity of adequate equipment defeats limited quantity of superior equipment. The Americans understood this instinctively. The Germans learned it through defeat, and the lesson, once learned, could never be forgotten. Modern war is decided not on battlefields, but in factories, not by tactics, but by production capacity, not by the quality of individual weapons, but by the overwhelming availability of adequate weapons. The Jeep was adequate, and there were 641,462 of them.